Oh.
Hi, I'm Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist, previously teaching at numerous different universities and now making a go at being an independent YouTube educator, answering the questions the internet poses, and supported by Patreon. In this video, what I'm going to be talking about, ironically given my location a long way from the habitat of such creatures, is Norse sea monsters, particularly those adjacent to the notion of what we call a kraken or kraken today. Note that I will not use this video to talk about the Jormungandr or Midgard serpent, since I've already made a video about that. If you're watching this on YouTube in 2021 or so, you ought to see a card in the top right linking to that video. Otherwise, you can easily find it on my channel. Alright, let's talk about sea monsters, or perhaps release the kraken. So the past has passed, a point that I'm often at pains to make, and people are at pains to complain at me about for making. But Norse mythology, the medieval mythology of Scandinavia, precedes what we can call a sort of early modern mythology or folklore of Scandinavia. So something like the kraken, which we start seeing in written sources from about the 1600s, is really later Scandinavian folklore, much like the Little Mermaid is, or the notion of what a troll is really is kind of later Scandinavian folklore than Old Norse. So we don't find this word kraken in Old Norse. Note too that the word that we use in English for the sea monster is already the whatever, right? So the noun is actually kraka. The N is the word the, which gets suffixed to the noun in Scandinavian languages. So kraken is already the kraka. So saying the kraken, you're already kind of saying the kraka. But I'll say the kraken in English because that's what everybody does. We do see that word applied, of course, in modern Scandinavian languages, Norwegian and Swedish, for a sea monster by the 1600s. Bishop Johan Ernst Gunnerus speculated in the mid-1700s that the kraken of his day was the same thing as the creature called havguva, or sea fog, in Old Norse texts. So what is that havguva, or sea fog? Well, let's take a look. We see this creature in a couple different Old Norse texts, including the saga of Eroad, Orvar Od's saga. Now I'm going to give this text to you to save time, since nobody's going to want to sit through this much Old Norse being read on the screen. In Old Norse on the screen, and I'll read you my English translation with comments about the Old Norse vocabulary if needed. So in Orvar Od's saga, Odd's illegitimate son Vignir is telling him about some monsters. He says, "These are two sea monsters. One is called Havguva, the sea fog or sea mist, and another Lyngbakr, the heather or ling back, the thing with heather or ling on its back. He is the greatest, or it is the greatest, the largest of all whales in the world." Now notice that different languages have different semantic categories for things, and it is a whale in Old Norse if it is a large sea creature, right? Not the mammalian thing is not the operative definition of whale in Old Norse. Different languages have different semantic categories. I've talked about that a lot in talking about color, which you can see some other videos about on my channel. And the havguva is the biggest creature shaped in the sea. It is its nature, the havguva's nature, that it swallows both men and ships and whales and everything that it can reach. It is in the deeps so long that days and nights pass, and then it shoots up its head and nostrils and it is never shorter than the tide, the Sjóvarfall, seafall, when it is up. So, i.e., it leaves its head and nostrils up for at least as long as the tide. Now it was that sound we sailed through when we went between its jaws. So it's so large that we sailed through a big sound in the ocean, and we were actually sailing between its jaws, its top and bottom jaws. And its nostrils and the lower jaw were the rocks which you saw in the ocean when the Lyngbakr was that island which sank down. And that Lyngbakr was the island that sank down. So we sailed through basically the sound and we thought the rocks on either side, we thought there were rocks on either side, but it was actually the upper and lower jaw of the Havguvve, and we saw an island that sank, and that was the Lingbakker. And your enemy, Ogmundur Floki, has sent these animals against you with his magic to kill you and all of your men, and then it goes on and kind of gets into the narrative details of this story. Okay, so here we have an enormous sea monster, the Havguvve, or sea mist, that puts its jaws up at the surface to sort of catch ships or whales or whatever. It's just that enormous. No real physical description of it, just like there isn't really a physical description of the Lingbakker monster, except that it's so big that you'd mistake it for an island. Now, we have a lot more detail about the Havguvve and some other monsters in a book called the Konungsskuggsjå, or King's Mirror, from the 1200s of Norway. This is one of the unusual texts in the Old Norse corpus that comes not from Iceland, but from another country, in this case Norway. Now, I'm going to give you a quick word from my sponsor, and then I'll come back and read you from the King's Mirror. All right, so there you see the text of the King's Mirror in Old Norse, and I will start reading to you what I see there in English. So, it is said about the oceans of Greenland that there are monsters in them, and I think, though, that they don't often appear before men's eyes, but because of that, men can tell about them enough they have seen them and become aware of them. So they don't appear often, but they've appeared enough that people can say they've seen them. It is said about the monster which men call the Havstrambas, this is different from the Havguvve or the Lingbakker, that it is in the ocean by Greenland. That monster is so big in size and height, so it's apparently wide and tall, and has stood upright out of the ocean. It has shown itself that it has a man's shoulders, neck and head, eyes and mouth, and nose and chin. But up from the eyes and eyebrows, it is most like a man who has on his head a sharp helmet. Notice all the H's there. Havi hafto hovdi fasan hjom. It's possible this actually comes from a poem that's not recorded. It has shoulders like a man, but no hands, and it has shown itself that immediately, and it looks like it has starved or grown emaciated from the shoulders down, and it is always thinner as you go further down, as you look further down, so it gets even more narrow as you go toward the tip of the tail. But no one has ever seen how the bottom part of it ends, which is shaped on it. So whether it has a fishtail like a fish, or whether it is sharp at the bottom like a peg. So they don't know if it ends in a tail or in just a thin point. I'm translating this as I go from the Old Norse, so forgive the somewhat halting translation. But its body has been somewhat in appearance like a glacier. No one has seen it so clearly, whether it has scales on it like a fish or skin like a man. Always, when this creature has been seen, men have known a certain storm in the sea thereafter. So storms come along with the appearance of this creature. Men have also marked that it has turned or fallen later into the sea when it has sunk. But if it has turned toward the ship and sunk toward it, so if it's coming toward a ship and sinks as it's coming toward the ship, then men have noticed great loss of life on the ship. But if it has turned from the ship and sunk away from it, right, so it's swum away from the ship and sunk going that way, men have been in good cheer, and because they will hold their men though they come into great sea, swelling sea, and great storms. So it's also a kind of creature of omen about how whether storms will kill or spare men. It has also been seen there a monster which men call the Marki. This would be like the sea Jotun woman, troll woman, monstrous woman. Of its size or shape, it has been shown to be like a woman up from the waist, because that monster has had on its breasts big nipples like a woman, long hands and long hair, and it grows in all ways from its neck and head like a man or person. Its hands have seemed to men large on that monster, and not with split fingers, rather with such a webbed foot that holds together like on a duck. So it has kind of like duck feet for hands. Down from the waist, that monster looks like a fish, both with scales and with a tail and with swimming feathers between swimming fins. This monster has been before, that seldom has been seen except before big storms. So this monster has seldom been seen except before big storms. It has a behavior of this monster that it has often sunk and then come up, that it has had fish in its hands. So it goes down, comes up with fish in its duck foot hands. And if it has turned toward a ship and played with fish or cast fish at the ship, then men have become afraid that they will endure great loss of life. That monster also has shown itself very frightening in its face, with a sharp forehead, whatever that means, and broad eyes, very, very bemouthed, very large mouth, and with wrinkled cheeks. And if that monster eats fish or throws them in the ocean far from the ship, then men have been in good hope about that they will hold their men, though that they come into big storms. So just like the other monster, the Havstramba, this one is an omen about what kind of damage a storm is going to do to you. Okay, so those are the monsters that the King's Mirror describes in the seas around Greenland, but then we get to the Havguva, which this one places around Iceland rather than Greenland. So there is a fish, this is in a section about wondrous fishes of Iceland, so that's why it comes, there is a fish, which is still untold of, which grows bigger in the eyes from telling about its size. So it seems to grow every time people talk about it. It's a great fish story, right? Because it will seem unbelievable to most men. The fewest men faster know about it to say well, because it is very seldom seen to most, because it is seldom close to land or in hope of fishermen, so you wouldn't very often be able to fish for it. And I think that there are not many fish of this kind in the sea. We call it most often in our tongue the havguva, the sea mist. I don't know authoritatively what to say about its length in terms of ells, so length of measurement of length, because when it has appeared before people, it has shown itself more like a fish. I don't know if it has been hunted for alive or found dead, and it seems to me likely that there aren't more than two of these beings in the oceans, and I don't think they could reproduce, because I think that they are always the same, so always the same two of these beasts. And I think that it would not be good for it would not permit other fishes, if there was many of them, as of other whales, because of their size and the amount of nourishment they need. They're so big that there couldn't be any other whales or other fish. And it is said of the nature of these fish that when one shall eat, it gives a big belch out of its neck, and follows after that belch a lot of stuff to eat. So it belches out and belches stuff for other fish to eat, as you'll see here in a minute. So that all kinds of fish that are in the area collect there together, both big and small, and they intend to harvest themselves some food and good nourishment. But this huge fish lets its mouth stand open, and that opening is so big that it is not smaller than a sound or a fjord, and the fish don't know to be aware when they run into that with their great crowd. So as far as they're concerned, it's just a big sound or a fjord, like we saw in Orvarod's saga. But when the stomach and the mouth of this creature is full, then it closes the mouth together, and it has hunted all of these beasts and walled them up, and which it earlier intended to hunt itself for food. All right, so what is this creature? This obviously isn't anything particularly similar to a real creature. Some people have seen some similarity to a giant squid, which our giant squid the giant squid, not the colossal squid, off of the coast of like Norway, Iceland, Greenland. But this doesn't actually sound that much like a squid. Some people have thought it's some sort of huge Whale is the basis of this, and Kraken is a taboo word attested for whale from Shetland, which of course was Scandinavian speaking up to perhaps sometime in the 1700s. And it's been speculated that maybe the vomit of the creature is related to undersea volcanic activity, right? When you see bubbling ocean from some kind of undersea volcanic vent, perhaps you might think that this is the Havguva belching. And the emergence of new islands, like Surtsey off of Iceland in 1963, might be behind something like the idea of the Lingbacher creature, the thing that appears as an island and then sinks. But we really just cannot, always take mythical creatures and make naturalistic explanations for them. More likely, this is just a terrifying specter of the nights spent aboard ships far from any land or familiar territory, and haunting the dreams of mariners as monsters haunt the dreams of mariners all over the world and at all times. All right, well, there you go, a first-hand look at some of the Old Norse sources for sea monsters of the Jormungandr. And from beautiful Wyoming, let me wish you all the best.